What does creativity have to do with our relationships with others? I think it has a lot to do with how we cultivate our compassionate interconnection with each other when we come to that place of seeing that we aren't separate. But to get into that, I want to start first by sharing a quote which Nazia Islam shared in our Embracing Mystery podcast, episode 2, that's from John O'Donohue. And he says, "Since the birth of the human heart is an ongoing process, love is the continuous birth of creativity within and between us." Love is the continuous birth of creativity within and between us. So to me, it's fascinating to think about love unfolding in our relationships as a birth of creativity. Um, it means our heart's formation is actually a creative, ongoing process that's we're continuing to be birthed, to be shaped, to be formed, molded, and grown as we cultivate connection with our deepest selves and then simultaneously with others. And seeing this as a form of creative unfolding expands the scope of creativity to encompass our own being and our own becoming as a creative act. But crucially, this doesn't actually happen in isolation. I spoke in an earlier video about cultivating compassionate connection with our deepest and most authentic selves, and our connections with each other flow right from that. I said there that inside us, underneath all our thoughts, emotions, feelings, and all the physical and mental sensations, all the things that we experience that come through the consciousness of our awareness, there's actually a deeper flow under all of that. And that creativity emerges and flows through the places in us that feel most connected and porous. And with that our deepest self is actually not like it's not like going into a cave where you're becoming more and more individual the deeper you get into who you are, whatever that happens to mean for you. But instead, that's actually where we find that we are most connected. Of course, to ourselves. There's a sense of compassionate connection with our own selves, but also with however we understand reality. There's so many different ways we each view and understand ultimate reality. But I want to add here that our deepest self is also where somehow we're deeply connected with each other. And there's quite a few ways we might look at that too, but here's just a few. Perhaps there's a collective unconsciousness that ontologically exists, something that actually is woven through all of humanity. Or some might frame it as an interconnection as we seek union with God or with the divine in a loving union. As we're entwined in the heart of God, that then we might be connected to others in that way. Or it could be a non-dual expression of consciousness, where at the end of the day, nothing exists in a totally separate way. Or perhaps for you, there's technically a separation, but we find that our human dignity, expressed in so many beautiful ways, is what binds us together as relational beings, that we belong to each other. But however you view these things, what I like about John O'Donohue's quote is he doesn't paint this as a static picture. Our hearts are being birthed. Our depths of self are always being formed. And love flowing through this space of interconnection in and between us is the birth of creativity. You might say that love is the wellspring of creativity. But even then, I don't think love and creativity are really separate. It's one compassionate, creative flow. And it means our relationships are also a creative endeavor, an art form in themselves. And that makes sense. The quote from John O'Donohue comes from his book Anamkara, which is about soul friends. It's about having a compassionate way of deep listening with one another, to truly companion each other in ways that provide space for our hearts to emerge, to become ourselves together. But what about artistic creativity? So great, all of life, your heart being formed is creative. Our relationships are a creative art form. But what about the traditional arts and expression of creative energy in us? What does that have to do with our compassionate connection and relationships with others? Whether that's interpersonal or at a social or societal level. Well, I have some thoughts on it. First, when we write a song, a poem, a book, a story that includes others' perspectives, whether they're fictional or real, we empathize with the characters and people involved. We get into their shoes, their experiences, their humanity. We have to explore their wants and needs and understand how they ended up where they are. What motivates them? Why are they in the situation they're in? And the same goes for visual arts and film, where capturing subtle nonverbal cues can create those layers of nuance that invite us as viewers to begin to imagine what might be happening inside of a person's head. And so we create invitations to connection and empathy with those that we portray visually. And you might ask, is compassion always necessary for this? But here's how I would frame it. If we're not compassionate towards the whole humanity of others, we're going to end up with shallow, flat representations of people, even of the things that we don't like. So we can't express the evil of a situation if we don't actually begin to come into contact with, empathizing with why someone might be acting in these ways, what kind of twisted things have happened in their soul and in their heart. It helps us to get an understanding of them as a whole person and to not dehumanize them. And then someone might say, well, why would I empathize with or try to fully understand someone I vehemently disagree with or who's clearly in the wrong? And while we're talking about creativity here, that's actually just a life question of why would you do that? And my suggestion is that we don't get to just dismiss the humanity of the people we want to reject. In our weaker moments, this isn't even for the other person, but having compassion is the way that we maintain our own humanity, our own sense of well-being and connection with others, regardless of whether they see themselves connected back to us. And it's also a way of receiving joy as you keep your heart open to them. There's a practice in the Buddhist tradition called the 8 verses of thought transformation. It's for forming bodhicitta, or the heart of enlightenment. And the first verse says, "Determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings, who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, I hold them most dear at all times." And so essentially what it's saying as a starting point, it goes much further beyond that. That's the first of 8 verses. But as a starting point, it's saying, well, even if you want to approach it selfishly, if the way to benefit the most from everyone around you is to regard them as more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel and to hold them most dear at all times. Actually, just for our own well-being, our own removal of suffering, the joyous compassion that we're then holding, it feels better for us. It is better to us, even if we were looking at that in a utilitarian way at first. And so it allows that creative flow to happen as well. It's not separate from just looking at it ethically of how we love and have compassion. The aim is to transform our hearts to be a different kind of heart, where that love is birthing creativity. And I'm not at that place myself. It's a practice I've been introduced to that I particularly enjoy. But I do think that it would give new perspective and ways of seeing others in my creative work, and for anyone who would do something like this. It gives greater insight into the human condition, and a different posture and way of relating to our subjects. But even when our creative work is not about a particular person, we're still often reflecting on something more than just expressing our personal experience. And that means we're trying to compassionately see and capture some aspect of human experience. So, like in this practice, it involves an inner movement of the heart to grow, to expand, and to come into contact with the experiences and sentiments, the questions that people have, and then we try to capture that. So compassion practices help us to see humanity in new ways, in deeper ways. But what about when our work is just personal? It's not about another person, or even if there's others involved, it's primarily our own perspective, our own experience. What then? How does that relate? One way to think about this is that when our work feels very personal, if we're expressing it from a place of our own deepest self, really trying to authentically capture our voice and ways of seeing, but letting it flow from that depth of interconnection, then it's actually going to be, in its particularity, able to really connect with others in the depths of who they are. It's something that Rick Rubin writes about in his book, The Creative Act, as how the particular actually helps to connect to the universal, because it more clearly names what is going on in a human experience that others can then relate to also. So even if others haven't had the same experiences, we're all unique, it evokes our own empathy and shared humanity as we really see one another and share our creative work together. What it helps to highlight is that one of the primary functions of creativity is to help connect us. Art is giving the gift of shared experience. So what starts off as my or your individual experience, we are then able to capture some piece of that in a way that will help to evoke that same experience in someone else. Obviously, it's through their own life circumstances, through their own ways that they sense and feel all of that. But it's taking, here's what I felt, here's what happened here, or some window into it, and communicating it in a way that gives rise to similar emotions, even if it, or actually maybe they would have a different emotional response to the same stimulus, to the same context, but it allows us to then have that conversation of what does this look like and feel like for both of us. So creativity helps us share our own authentic selves in ways that connect us in shared experience and help us to empathize with one another's experiences of being human. And if we've done our work of cultivating compassionate interconnection, the art we create will also help people to see the humanity in the characters and the people that we portray. And our expressions of broader human experience will be more empathetic and thus more accurately reflective of those experiences of the human condition. I like to see this all as part of the creative compassionate flow in process, where the love within and between us is giving birth to creativity.